Welcome, welcome everyone. Hi, Greg.
All right. I think we'll just let everyone funnel in here. Give them a couple minutes to have everyone settle in. All
Yes.
right. Let's see here.
Where's everyone coming in from today? Actually, here's a bonus question while we wait. What info stealer do you want to hear about today?
Oof.
We can do some sort of info stealer bingo.
Infostealer bingo. Swear to God, if someone says goblin, I'm gonna.
I see red line. Oh,
Oh
lots.
wow. Wow. Hey, Bellingham. I was just up there. Oh no, not goblin. Not Jeremy, no. I'll tell you all the story about Goblin today. It's a funny one. It's a funny story about good old Goblin info stealer. Chrome loader. Oh man, that Chrome loader was essentially our one of our biggest threats last year when I was going doing their threat report here at Huntress. Chrome loader was everywhere. And it's interesting because Chrome loader is one of those rare ones that's just like a mixture of a bunch of other ones. It's not really a true one in the sense of everything. So yeah, but it was just they have a very, very good distribution model. That's what I'll say. The search and the SEO hijacking on that one's been pretty prevalent.
I see Banshee as well. We'll be getting.
Oh, Banshee. Oh, good old Banshee.
All right. Well, just so everyone knows, we'll have the chat here if anyone has any questions, or we have our Q&A. So feel free to chime in, and if anything comes up while we're going through all this, give it another moment or so to let everyone join. All right. I think we can get into it.
Yes.
Yeah, well, welcome everyone. If you're here to learn about Infostealers, you're in the right place. We've
Okay.
got a packed agenda today. Um, we're going to briefly go over what's going on in the news and do a rundown of all the different Infostealer variants and families, talk about the life cycle of Infostealers, and then discuss real world examples of Infostealers that we've seen in the SOC. And then finally, give some tips for kind of how you can best prevent Infostealers. So let's do real quick intros here. Most of you probably already know Greg Linares, Principal Threat Intelligence Analyst at Huntress. How's it going, Greg?
Doing well. And this is everyone, please welcome Lindsay. This is her first one. So this she's killing it so far. So yeah, this is our first of many, hopefully. So yeah.
Yeah, excited to be
Glad to
here.
have you here. Good. Yep.
Thank you. Yep. Yeah, I'm Lindsay, Technical Community Engagement Rater at Huntress.
That's
So
a long title.
I know.
That's massively. I didn't know that was your full title. That's
I didn't even
incredible.
say the full one. I just
Yeah,
tried to
yeah,
wrote
just
it down. Yeah, I know.
don't
It's
blame you.
fine. All right, let's skip into the news here. We've actually had a pretty packed past week with a lot of different things. We've had law enforcement operations. We actually had a little bit of a rapid response last week. So Samsung Magic Info 9 server flaw, basically, um, long story short on that one is our SOC detected exploitation in the wild involving Samsung Magic Info 9 server, which for those of you who don't know, it's a content management system for kind of controlling digital signage displays. So this is something maybe, organizations in the retail sector might have. And the quick background context is that there was a flaw in this system that was previously patched last year in August. And then more recently, there was a publicly disclosed proof of concept released for Magic Info 9 servers. And the flaw, as part of that release, could enable unauthenticated users to upload web shells or achieve RCE under the Apache Tomcat process. So Huntress was able to independently verify the latest version of Magic Info 9 server is vulnerable, as the POC suggested. That tells us either the patch from August 2024 was incomplete, or this is a separate but similar flaw. So regardless, our recommendation is that users that are on Magic Info 9 server should basically ensure that their servers aren't internet facing until a fix is available.
Yeah.
Because we're
Huge
seeing
shout out. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, just saying we were seeing limited exploitation there.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's died down just a little bit, but it's still going around. And I just want to make sure we get a shout out to Jai and Craig, who absolutely killed that report and that post that we saw there. And yeah, exactly what Lindsay said. It's if you're have that available, my our guess is that the patch is kind of in between areas right now. Just make sure you isolate that and restrict access to trusted individuals only.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Here's a
Yeah.
quick timeline on kind of what we saw in terms of exploitation. But yeah, we have only seen this in three separate incidents, so nothing too widespread or anything. So, um, all right. Next, we've got some news around Lockbit and Hellcat.
Oh, yeah. Shout out to Ray of X of Hellcat fame. So if you're familiar with Lockbit, the ransomware group, then maybe you'll be surprised to know that they actually got hacked this week or last week. And it appears to be the actual same threat actor, or at least they made it seem like it was the same threat actor that hacked Everest ransomware group last year. The same message was displayed on their website, and it looks like yeah, it was a happy crime is bad. Love for XXXO from Prague. Same exact message that happened last year. I think it was last September, if I remember correctly, of Everest Group. And Lockbit has since taken down their website, reshuffled around, and actually offered a bounty on whoever finds the information who this individual is. So that is it's kind of a it's in the ransomware world. It's this year has not been short of drama. So the other one that we came across is also you see here from Ray, Ray XBF of Twitter, who just stepped down as the in charge of Hellcat. So Hellcat, as well as Grepnap, Holly and Miyoko all left Hellcat, and they are going on to other things. Ray has actually been dropping um, surprisingly threat intel information on other ransomware groups on Twitter. So yeah, Hellcat seems to be given to another ransomware group. And I mean that follows in market with like Ransom Hub, who also disbanded surprisingly very fast on April this year. So the ransomware landscape has been quite shaken up in the last couple of months. So yeah, we'll see how that is treated. They did, and ransom, or if you remember, Hellcat just produced, I think it was like 6 or 7 new victims in the last week. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, they had been kind of full force ahead over the past few weeks.
Yeah, yeah, and I know a couple other members who are remained back are still working on stuff. So it's an interesting time to be alive in the threat intelligence community, to say the least.
Yeah, lots going on there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now on the other side here, we've actually got in the past week two law enforcement operations. And I know, Greg, we were kind of talking about this yesterday, but just these names are kind of always kind of funny.
Yes, yeah, yeah. It was funny because I absolutely missed Moonlander earlier, and then someone was like, "Oh yeah, Moonlander." I was like, "What is going on? What are these names going on?" But yeah, I was following Power Off. But yeah, you're exactly. These
Yeah.
like, did you want to go ahead and tackle some of these or?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I can kind of give
yeah.
some high level context to them, but yeah, basically these are two separate ones to clarify. But first was this Operation Moonlander, as you just mentioned, Greg. Basically ended in federal authorities seizing 2 domains and indicting 4 people for their involvement in operating 2 botnet services called AnyProxy and 5socks. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah, the botnet was created. Basically, the background here is they infected older model wireless routers globally with malware that allowed them to be reconfigured, and then made those routers available for sale on as proxy servers, essentially. So that was the first one, and it was kind of interesting. I was looking through the you're probably aware of all this, Greg, but like just, for instance, fivesocks.net advertised they had 7,000 proxies for sale worldwide, and I think yeah.
Anytime you see a large number of proxies being sold, like because you see professional companies offer proxies, but it's like always like, oh, we have 100 different ones. Whenever you see a large amount like that, that's always a red flag. That's always a
Yeah.
red flag.
Yeah, exactly. So it was funny reading through kind of what the DOJ dropped there, and
Oh
um,
man.
and then the second one here is Power Off, which, so this one is actually ongoing and it's been going on for a while. I think they had dropped something, a different announcement about kind of a takedown last December or something, but this one was more focused on DDoS for hire domains, and I think they had seized 9 of them. So, I know these are also called booter or stressor websites and essentially allow um, cyber criminals to kind of have these DDoS for hire types of services that they can use to launch their own attacks. So that was kind of the big news there.
Yeah, yeah. And for those of you who are watching on the threat intel side, we are safe from yet another exposure of hacker underwear from this breach. If you've been doing the count, I think there's been up to 7 in the last year of arrests where hackers were in their underwear. Luckily, we are not exposed this time, so that's a win for us, honestly.
I'm happy about that. Yeah,
Very happy,
I couldn't
very
take it
happy,
better. Yeah.
very happy.
Um, all right. So let's move on. Okay. So yeah, Greg, I'll let you kind of take the wheel here. You have a lot of really cool charts and really good threat intelligence data. So excited to
Yeah.
walk through that.
So everyone, I asked you all, in the beginning or actually it was Lindsay asked everyone what Infostealer variants you wanted to hear. And man, the history of Infostealers is pretty varied. And let's go ahead to the next slide and we'll talk about that. And this is not all of them because let me tell you, I tried to put even more on here and it just got overwhelming. So these are like the major families. And it started all with Zeus, the Zeus era back in 2007. And that was Zeus and AKA Zbot, and like you might remember Citadel, Ice 4 or Ice 9, Game Over. These were all variants of Zeus. And it started off stealing bank credentials, and that was like keyloggers back in the day. And the big thing there was in 2000, like 10 and 11, that's where it stopped to lower because right in the beginning of 2011, its source code leaked. And once Zeus source code leaked, that really is what started the expansion of everything else. And we got all these other families started coming out, and then Zeus started to get lower in popularity, and that gained like rise to markets like Azo Rolt or AZO Rolt, however you want to say it, Pony Stealer, Hawkeye. I'm trying to think of all these other ones. And that's when they started, that's when they started shifting from just financial data to other credentials. And that was crypto wallets was a big starting a point there. Software license data was actually a thing that we don't see that much anymore, where they're stealing these license keys off back in the day and using that to get free software. So yeah, that was started off and that was going on from like 2011 to about 2015, 16. And that's when we started to see the real industrialization of info stealers. And that's where like the big one there was Raccoon Stealer and Vidar, Redline. And that whole era is where from like 2016 to 2018, 19 era, that's where that started. And that's where we saw all these big families that are still today. And that's also when marketplaces started to come around. So 2018, that's when the big markets like Genesis and Russian market, we'll talk about those in a little bit, but that's when people started realizing that all these info stealers were so popular and so varied that they can actually make lots of amount of money on there. And then instead of just selling these in little tiny forums and dark web areas like back in the day, it was everything from IRC to even like private Telegram stuff, which is still used today, but private servers like that. We started showing the dark market started forming there, and then there's a mass amount of purchasing available. And
Mm.
then finally, after the, or moving on from there, not finally, we still got a couple more years to go because info dealers have long changed and long been varied. In about the 2020s, that's when we started seeing like Mars and Taurus and all the, rise in the very beginning of like atomic stealers and Aurora stealers, Luma in this era. And that's when everything really started getting to where we're seeing it today. Like these, like all these are kind of like forks off existing families. And that's when we started to see sort of like the modern day infostealer, like MFA codes, Discord, Slack credentials, um, like logs. And that's when these marketplaces started coming out for where you can get very targeted information. And they started making this as logs as a service, if you will. Basically, if I'm looking for a company to target or I'm looking for an individual to target, you could find these marketplaces that allow them to grab this information and put it in, and you can grab that information and use that to compromise a corporation. So if you're looking for these, and then that's where the APTs and other groups also started integrating and allowed that to be a fast flux of information available for people to steal and for ransomware operators to working with this. So that's yeah, someone just asked if they ever found the person who was behind Zeus. I can't remember off the top of my head. I I'm not sure about that. I was actually back in that day, I was doing a lot of work with finding Zeus variants, and that was, man, that was a never-ending task because that was one piece of malware that would just never die. I was convinced I would see Zeus for the rest of my life when I was dealing with that. Yep, yep.
Yeah. Looks like, yeah, one question, we're getting a couple questions here,
That's
but
okay.
difference between the blue and red dots.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's the blue dots here are the marketplaces that formed and which of the ransom or I'm sorry, which of the info stealers fed to those markets. And you can I try to make these as family as or like each one's kind of like a layer of when these came out. And the arrows represent what market they sell information to exclusively, as well as what family they're related to, what source they came from. So yeah.
Yeah,
Great question. Sorry about that. Yep.
yeah. Someone else asked, would you link that to the payment card industry cutting off access to the pharmaceutical fraud industry?
Ooh, that's a good question, and I'm gonna say that's above my pay grade because I have some feels about that. But that's a good one. Yeah. Oh yes, yeah. Yeah, Adrian, as you see, yes, no underwear photos and opensanctions.org is also a good blessing for everyone to see. Let's go ahead and hit the next slide here.
Got it.
All right, so now knowing all these families, like what is the actual goal of InfoStealers? And so there is essentially four goals for InfoStealers to have, and that's coming. And first off is going to be generalized identity theft. That's to steal your identity, access personal information, and that is the most common and the traditional one, and that's been going on since the dawn of InfoStealers itself. And these are usually sold at, mass amounts, bulk. You can purchase this information, and that has not really changed much. What has changed is that identity that information that is sold is bundled with almost all the rest of these. And so the next big goal was financial theft. Again, this is another one that's been started off since the beginning of InfoStealer times. That's to commit financial fraud, that's to steal your banking information. And that is essentially the backbone of Zeus and all those how other stuff. It's actually financial theft is actually not as well driven anymore because the finance fraud has gotten so well. Back in the day, you could steal a credit card and use it for. I think I was looking at the numbers of back in the day at one point, and like you could have a credit card stolen. It would take up to 24 hours for that card to be deactivated. So you had a 24-hour spree to go on. Nowadays, with all the banking information, has got really good about identifying when fraud has occurred, and it's limited to hours now. So that's been a big reason why that's gone down. And after financial theft, the next biggest one we're going to see is corporate theft or corporate targeting, and that's used to attack your employer and your place of work. And I was going to get into that. This is the main driving force for the modern day info stealers. They're very much used as the means to get information and to order to fuel attacks, which is often the areas where ransomware operators are used to get into areas, or other sophisticated attackers. And they get that information from you, they steal that information, they use it, and they use that as initial access. And finally, on the darker side of things, is the behavioral profiling and supplemental data theft. And this is like your intimate data that is being sold. And this is generally two parts of this. This is data that is sold as supplemental data for any of the other ones. A lot of that would be like we'll get into it, but it's a lot of it's like where you at and how you and what identify information you have that makes it unique to you, as well as information that's very private to you and can be used for extortion or blackmail. And this information is actually sold at very specialized markets and at premium prices. Now, going on to the next slide here, we'll talk about what each of these actually involve. So identity theft, that's going to be your website, email, autofill data, credentials, generalized credentials, cookies, SSOs, anything that you can log into web sessions and get that, your 2FA, your MFA, your OTP keys. So with that, identity theft is also the base for all the rest of them. Basically, all these, except for the extortion information, is going to have that kind of information kind of bundled with that. And we'll talk about why. So financial theft is stealing your credit card. And also now the other one that's going around is digital currency. Which digital currency occurred, like your crypto, that's not just crypto, though. That's just crypto, Amazon gift cards, in-game money was a big point of Infostealer data thefts in from 2011 to 2016. We're starting to see that a little bit go a lot lower now, as digital game currency has lost its value. We still see it, but it's not nearly as bad as it was. Everyone much rather steal cryptocurrency at this point. And the other big one, the biggest one right now, is like corporate targeting. That's going to be your SAML passwords, your single sign-on, VPN, SSH, RMMs, RDP, Slack especially, and FTP credentials. Anything that can get access to your corporate information, where you work, business information, that is primo data right now. That's where Infostealers are taking that information and making entire marketplaces out of it. The next biggest one of those is going to be your API keys and your cloud service credentials. That is absolutely ramping up too. And those two are the biggest, fastest growth that we're seeing in Infostealers stealing, and then putting on the market at higher prices. And finally, the extortion and supplemental data harvesting, that's going to cover not just your PII, your health information, your PHI, your geolocation, but system fingerprinting. And with the system fingerprinting, that's going to be your installed applications, what EDRs you have installed, what software you installed. And what is done there is these Infostealers marketplace have gotten really good at maximizing their value. So what often will happen is they'll sell your credentials at one price, and then they'll split off your system fingerprints which has your installed applications and EDR, and put that into another market or sell that separately. So therefore, if information is stolen and a sophisticated attacker wants to know what EDR you have at your workplace, what installed applications you have, and other things that can sort of plan out the attack, that's sold at a different price and separate. So it's made so that people have to buy those separately, but bundle them together in order to get very sophisticated data to start the initial attack phase of corporations. And on the darker side, that the data harvesting is not limited there. It's also like your private data, chat data, photos, movies, documents, and user-created content. That's all used for later blackmailing, extortion, and the darker side of Infostealers, if you will.
Yeah. I've just two follow-ups there, but was wondering, in terms of more of those extortion cases versus kind of the corporate enterprise cases, what are you seeing in terms of which one is, what's the breakdown between the two? And How?
Yeah. So at my previous job, I did a lot of exclusive work with extortion cases. It was gone to the point where there was we saw attackers like going after a lot of startup companies or companies heads and C-levels and finding out, getting this information from them, and then extorting not just them but family members. They would actually go out and find information on relatives and use that and send that information to them, and that's everything from sextortion, blackmail to everything like your kid could have had done something and get your kid kicked out of college or school. And anything to cause stress against people, these attackers were leveraging that and using it against individuals. And unfortunately, they were very good at it. Like I said, enough to the point that we had to have tests on individuals and help identify, what could be at this, what was their threat level, what was their risk level, and help them figure out how to minimize that. Along with that, those are sold at a different market. Those are very different markets than other places, and those are definitely dark web markets. And the individuals who to run those are a whole nother level of evil. Matter of fact, it was interesting. There was a lot of that type of marketplace being talked about on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and even the ransomware operators were like, "No, these people are terrible. We don't like these people at all." And so, like, I mean, you have to be. I feel like you have to be pretty low on the morale scale, the morality scale, to be pointed at by ransomware operators and said, "Hey, these guys are worse than us."
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, it strikes me that also looking at the different types of data outlined on this slide that, as new things are introduced and things change, that also changes kind of the data here. And someone had asked, this might be something that we can address in the slides moving
Yeah.
forward. What and when was the first wallet stealer? So,
Oh,
uh,
that's a good question. And man, I really honestly, I think there was actually, I remember there was a specialized variant of Zeus that I remember had stole wallets, because I remember reverse engineering it and looking at it and be like 2012-ish and being like, that's silly. Why would you want to steal like these 80-cent objects? Like, I guess people have lots of them at the time. Little did I know that these would later become the foundation of lots of amounts of money. Like, honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't believe in crypto in the beginning. But yeah, I remember looking at that way back in the day. I mean, I remember that was back in the day where you could complete a CAPTCHA and then get a Bitcoin for completing a CAPTCHA at one point. There were like people were like these little puzzles. There was like literally places that were training their AI and feeding you Bitcoin. Imagine doing that in the old days and just getting mass amounts of money.
yeah, yeah, seriously. Right up here. And that's actually
Right.
pretty good, relevant to this next slide here. So.
Yes. So now what I did here, this is Huh. Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Appreciate that. So here, I'm gonna put this a caveat. I tried to do this as best as I could. So what I did is I tried to figure out all the variants of the first major variant of every info stealer that came out. What did they do? What did they steal? And what did they target? And as you can see, it's pretty much all these had almost the same kind of essentials, the bare essentials that all these were taking. That's your browser credentials, almost all cookie sessions, crypto wallets net these days, clipboard content. It's kind of universal. You'll start seeing like the system info and fingerprint. All that information is kind of universal. And then some of them had like Discord, Slack tokens, and well, that's another was another major one. But yes, you see like the Google authentication backups and password managers and all these other ones. Now, if you go on to what they are now, next slide here, and you'll see that they're almost all identical. Like the ones that you'll see is like the iCloud, where these aren't ideal like for Mac environments, and the Google authentication backups are still kind of a big thing that people are still adding this. But as you can see, it all funnels down that this is a business. And like the best way I like to describe these is each of these is, you got to think of them as like a product. And when you have a rival product able to say, "Hey, I'm able to steal this information," they are every other group, and these are all essentially products, are going to take that information and add it to their product in order to make it a competitive marketplace. And unlike other malware families, it's been pretty wild to see the source code leaks of these where people actually mock other families, being like, oh, thanks for that free information, because a lot of these developers of these info stealers are apparently kind of lazy and just wait for other groups to do all the research and then steal it right out of them. So yeah, that's pretty, it's been pretty wild to see these kind of all funnel into the same kind of essential needs of data theft here. And again, this is another caveat with these is a lot of these have modules now. That's a big thing that we'll talk about in a little bit later is these modules and these could allow people to add these functionality that's not even added in here and to be able to it. So essentially all these, if they have it, if it's supported on the operating system that they live on or they target, there's capable that these can steal all these categories. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Someone asked too, are there any corporate targetings in recent years that focus on snagging the global address list or portions of it?
That's a good question. So all of these, another thing to note that is all of these have the ability to grab data that is not here. There's a lot of them have a good feature that a lot of them have is the lookout list, or they'll put where a attacker can put keywords in a list, and when the infostealer starts accessing files and looking for that content in there, they can grab that and pull it out. So there is a lot of modularity in these, and again, like I said, modules allow a lot of these to have additional features that are not in traditional means. Yeah. All right, and yeah, we'll talk about the life cycle of Infostealers. So as what everyone is usually familiar with is, everyone gets infected, like the Infostealer ends up on a system. And how does that really start is it's like from your your search engine or your search engine optimization hijacking, your downloading of a from a tool or something that's not quite what it says it is. You know, bad torrenting, uh, hijacking of websites where they take over a website and they redirect you to a bad download. And there's a wide availability of how you get info stealers on your system. However, the other flip side of that is, where does this information go? Once it's stolen and exfiltrated off your system, where does it go? And that's truly where where the history of info stealers kind of varies quite a bit. And that would be where we talk about all these marketplaces, and that's where these marketplaces really come into play, or where this information actually gets sold, and where these info stealers make their money and why they're so successful. You know? And so the most notable of these, and again, I'm going to caveat these with, I tried to find, like, a lot of these are, we'll talk about these in a bit. A lot of these are Telegram groups and Discord groups where they could have had a room or something available prior or after this. It was kind of hard to find out where all these random places started, but essentially these marketplaces are where each of these started, and there's a current status of this. Genesis Market got seized. Breach Forums is kind of shut down, quote unquote. That one happened very recently, and now everyone's unsure about where it goes. StealerNet shut down, and then Raid Forums, all famous, got seized in 2022. Now, if we go to the next slide, I'll be able to talk about each of these a little bit more in depth and give you a nice little graphic. By the way, this was the hardest graphic I had to design in a long time. I thought this was a good idea, and let me tell you, I spent a lot of time. This is all ASCII, by the way. There is no graphics in here. This is all ASCII design and spacing, and it was interesting to get this. So we'll start off with Genesis. Genesis Market was very sophisticated, invitation only. And it had the big thing about Genesis was it had a really slick interface. People could browse by location, IP, browser fingerprint. That is really what set Genesis apart. And that ran from all the way to 2018, all the way to 2023. And it was taken down by Operation Cookie Monster. And that was a pretty cool event, because that was like when that happened, like the amount that was, like, I think honestly between that and when raid forums went down was the two biggest operations I think had the biggest impact on Infostealers in modern day history. Those went down, and yeah, yep. Andre knows what's going on here. Yeah. That's a classic one. But he's talking about I can't even pronounce that. I don't even know how to pronounce that word, but Exditic was a famous InfoStealer marketplace. And after that, or during that time, Russian market was starting up after that. And Russian market, also known as Russian Market Store or Russian Market One Word, was a long-standing ClearNet accessible shop that had logs. Big things here were Raccoon and Redline fed into it. Really minimal interface, bulk pricing. It was kind of a mid-level market, I would say. There's a lot of data leaks and scrutiny about it that kind of went throughout its history. It's remained around. It's never going to die. It's another one of those things that's just going to be there. Yes, yeah, Too Easy exactly. I was about to say Too Easy and Russian are actually owned by the same groups. They kind of rival each other in some sense. Now, Too Easy is another mid-tier marketplace in credential logs and stealer logs. However, Too Easy is kind of like the budget conscientious like one. It's cheap access to 1,000 logs, like lots of data, low end data goes there and it's fed into that. And the nice thing about Too Easy is it's a lot. There's lots of data being pumped into there. Vidar, Taurus, also Redline feed into that. Now, Exodus was a dark web like clearinghouse of data. If you can say that. PII dumps, forged documents, hacking tools, everything was there. Now, it also had an interesting sort of like a vendor shops and open listing kind of listings kind of area, sort of like breach forums plus credential stores. It tried to replicate a lot of Genesis, but it just like it became a data reselling hub. The big thing that Genesis had, it was a lot of bots fed into it. So it's never really gotten to that era, the same kind of thing or same kind of level. Now, Breach Forums, man, Breach Forums is the big one that formed after Raid Forums went down. Breach Forums was a stolen data, stealer logs, like credentials, like that was a big thing, and that was moderated by Pom Pom Purin, which is famous for his recent takedown, and it's gone all to multiple takedowns, breaches, resurfaced, came back up. It is almost like the Lazarus of if you will, of modern day markets where it just won't die, and then has a different owner or a different group running around. It's there's a lot to unpack there. Now, with the next two ones, like Log Hunters, Infolog, Empire, and we'll even go to Luma, we'll batch these all together. These are Telegram groups that kind of based off these. And with these, they're all cybercrime groups that kind of merge together, sell on Telegram. Some of these they have smaller sub rooms and sub areas that are invite only. This is kind of like the future of this, where dark web is sadly, like it's the whole dark web. I guess the behavior of the dark web is kind of merging onto Telegram, allows them to be a little bit more dynamic. And that is, and also we see that now with StealerNet, which recently that went down in 2024. That was a Discord channel that went down, and since then, honestly, there's been a lot, there's been a lot of moving away from Discord for these. And finally, we'll go into raid forums, and raid forums is, man, that technically like it really started in like 2015, exchanged hands in 2018, and then continued on. And in 2020 or 2022, sorry, it was finally taken down by Operation Tourniquet. And that was a big deal because it really was like the main marketplace for a long time. Credentials, Infostealer logs, database breaches, you could find everything there.
Someone had a good question, which is, are there estimates on how big these groups are in terms of revenue, as well as human resources?
That is a hard one to say because a lot of them tracking, what gets sold there is not really publicized. They will throw, data on there. Some of them will tell you the data is sold. A lot of them won't tell you the data is sold. And also there's times where the data can be sold to multiple customers or multiple entities. So it's really hard to track how much is there. What we can do is we can kind of track what some of these the amount of the market on, and we can move that to the next graphic. We can say how much of this is being sold on markets. Now, what we have here is the amount of credentials in thousands that are marked for high value that is going on in these markets today. And we are from 2020 to 2024. And we'll start off with website credentials. Back in 2020, that was 320,000 high value credentials. By high value, that's what the sellers would say verified data, never been used, is an actual human being that, and the data is complete. And, and some of this high value would also be that they related to individuals that would be targeted. There is a value to these. So that how each place determines value is subjective. And that's another here nor there question, or that's a question for another time to figure out how these markets market high value. But we'll look at each of these categories here. And VPN credentials, as you can see, is kind of fluctuate like very little. Same thing with domain credentials. They only go up, showing that there's more people getting breached. As more domains get formed and more of these Infostealers become available, there's going to be more breaches. SSO tokens rise up a little bit more. Session tokens started to rise very steeply. As you can see that we had quite a bit of those. Now, the interesting thing here is, like I mentioned earlier, Slack tokens. Slack tokens are a completely separate category here because they are extremely high value. A lot of breaches have actually occurred exclusively using just Slack tokens. And some of those were really famous. Scattered Spider is the group that back in the day that was very famous at using those to compromise groups. And entire breaches have occurred from pure Slack tokens. And the other one that's moved on, that's accelerated quite high, is API keys. API keys has moved on extremely high. We've seen marketplaces absolutely move onto those as ideal. Yeah, it's I think quadrupled or maybe even higher and more. Yeah, it's almost it's more than 5 times, I believe, than when it started in 2020. I think it's one of the fastest moving groups. And cloud service credentials and RMM and IT access tool credentials, that is another one that's we're actually seeing quite a bit move up, and that's that. And by terms of moving, that one's actually another one that's actually quite, like, I think it's 6 times as much as it did since 2020. So the number may not be that high, but the demand for these has increased quite a bit. And we'll move on to the next slide here. I just realized I'm moving a little slow. I'm moving a little slower than normal here, so I apologize. Here, we're going to talk about the prices for these. So as you can see here, each of these is the varied cost of what, again, high value credentials vary from. And you can see email credentials, $10 to $65, all the way to very expensive targeted attacks involving SSO tokens and cloud service tokens and domain credentials, all being worth up to 200 or 250 USD or more per access. And that is interesting to see because, again, that's when we see on those high ends, that is, we know this individual works for a targeted group, and that's sold to often these Infostealers will sell to ransomware groups or other ones. And there's even higher prices than these. These are just open market. And the truly highest price of these are in very closed behind doors marketplaces where the data is completely sold from end to end from the entire package, if you will. And that can be sold for thousands of dollars. Yes. And let's go on to the next one here. Oh, breaking the life cycle. Yeah. So this one, Liz, do you want to talk about this one here?
Yeah, sure. And
Yeah.
actually, someone had asked in the Q&A, Google has played cat and mouse with Infostealers over the years. What do you think will be the solution to this big problem. And this slide actually kind of touches on that question,
Yes.
where basically these are events that negatively impact the Infostealer life cycle in some way. And so when we look at Infostealers, there's a couple different ways. Source code leaks, where the source code of the malware is exposed, law enforcement operations that aim to seize domains, servers, Telegram accounts, other types of infrastructure, law enforcement crackdowns on the marketplaces where Infostealer credentials are sold. And I'm curious what everyone thinks. Feel free to give a shout out in the chat. Which of these three things do you think might have the biggest impact really on the Infostealer's life cycle? Feel free to give a shout out and I'll kind of move forward here. We'll go through
Yep.
it. And Greg, you can give your opinion.
Yeah, yeah. So I can tell you about a recent one was Banshee. The Banshee Stealer had its source code leaked back in November of last year, and honestly, that was an event. It's I can't remember exactly how it was leaked per se. It's escaping my mind off at the moment, but I do remember it literally had the entire source code available on GitHub. You could just download it in like a project. And yep. And what that actually did, go ahead and hit the next slide. We'll talk about what happened there is the Infostealer developers are, as we mentioned earlier, they are entirely highly opportunistic. The minute that happened, individuals forked that information, and we saw Frigid Stealer, Flesh Stealer, Real Stealer, Object C Stealer, Amos, which 2.0 of Stealer 2, like 2 plus, that all got formed within months of that happening. So when this information, when these source code leaks, the Infostealer community or development community is on top of it, and they're happy to make a quick dollar off of that. So moving on, and we'll talk about each of these. So Mac OS X Stealers, they have a long history, and I had quite a bit to talk about this, but we're a little bit short on time. And Banshee's been around since 2014, if you will, and that's back in gatekeeper bypassing days where that was a big deal. And Mac OS X, credential theft and info stealers have always like kind of pivoted on the latest method to steal that information. And that's varied from back in the day, Mac Spy, Mac Rat, they all used fake software installers. And a lot of the time they were focused on getting root. And that was used by privilege escalations to get root. And what has happened here is that's kind of changed. And as you see with these 5 families we have on the side here, there is various methods to get access to your credentials that these use, and persistent methods, operational differences here. And the latest one of these is actually SparkCat, which uses some pretty interesting methods to get that. We'll go on and talk about that in the next slide here. And that will be, yes, so Infostealer behaviors, macOS, their iCloud and Keychain are your primary targets. That's where everyone's credentials are stored. And back in the day, plist and launch agents used to be the go-to method. OS X defenses and protections have locked those down. That's moved on to profile Apple scripts and profile injections, that kind of the later things. But now Infostealers are kind of doing a hybrid mechanism where they're trying to get permissions, and that started off with modifying sudo, shell, terminal piggybacks, all these sophisticated methods, even to stealing digital certificates in order to elevate their privileges. However, in the last 2 months, the biggest 2 things that happened are hijacking UI elements, or simply asking the user to have them run as root, and that's worked. One of the most interesting ones I saw recently was Infostealer would nag a user with fake things, to like these fake pop-ups to make a user be like, oh yes, I allow. Then they would ask for they would trigger the real permission. So the user was already upset and tired of clicking the button. They just blew past that and allowed the actual permission to occur. So that's an interesting social engineering method that we're seeing, and that's kind of the future of malware and info stealers on a Mac, essentially. And yeah, so now the next one of this would be talking about takedowns. And You want to go ahead and jump on this, Lindsay?
Yeah. We just gave a quick example here of
Yep.
the Redline and Meta takedown. Basically happened last year and, included charges against one of the developers of the Redline Stealer. So, the pros of this, kind of takedown is kind of, the exposure of the tactics and making that sort of intelligence public is always helpful. You can see here, I grabbed these images from the DOJ court filings, but the one on the left, there's a screenshot of an alleged Redline user, which shows how they use Redline to successfully steal hundreds of thousands of cookies, files, credentials, etc. And on the right, there is a map of the operational backend of kind of Redline. And then in the middle, you can see the developer there, an administrator of the Redline Infostealer. So this shows his relation, not just kind of with the marketplace and the buyers, but also kind of some of the OPSEC errors that he made and using a alias across several different accounts, and that ultimately led, in part, law enforcement to identify him. So
Adrian, good point. Yeah, Skype being down, entire disrupt operations, shattered. Yeah, shattered. That's it. That's the big one there. And
um,
then go ahead. Yeah.
go ahead, Greg.
Oh, I was gonna say you can go ahead. Yeah, we're talk about Operation Talent, which this was a recent one of where the law enforcement actually said we're tired of taking out the source code and these and the actual individuals who keep it's like Hydra. You cut one out and then two more grow in its place. So what they've now done is shifting to targeting the marketplace. And Operation Talent was a very was a I think one of the more recent ones of that where they actually went after where these credentials are being sold at. So they know that they can take out the developers and they just get rewritten and replaced by someone else. When you take out the marketplace and the where these are actually being sold, you make everyone worried about safety, and that causes larger disruptions that we've seen by doing this. And so this is now the ideal methodology that law enforcement has taken to target these.
Absolutely. All right. We'll just do a quick example here from the SOC that we've seen, but you can see one instance here where we saw that involved Lumastealer, which is a very popular Infostealer. And
Yeah.
essentially what happened is a user downloaded a malicious executable with a misspelled version of the Notion app, which is a legitimate productivity and note-taking app. And the executable was download. You can see there Notion with an M from a newly registered domain, which we found was linked to a malicious IP and basically disguising this as the Notion app. And from there, the executable was observed using remote debugging in Chrome, which is a pretty common activity observed from Infostealers. So as you can see on the top signal, this appears to have created a file named rare temp in the temp directory, which is a name that had been observed being used by Lumastealer.
Hmm.
So that's one example. I, also I'm checking the Q&A here, and I just want to make sure we get to these questions.
Yep.
So yeah, it also is kind of relates, but someone asked, how has Huntress seen services like MS conditional access, DLP policies protecting against these token and credential thefts? Is E5 security solving some of this? That's a pretty good
That's
question.
a pretty good question. Unfortunately, I'm not the person to be asked that. I'm sorry. But what I can't like the one thing I was going to add to the last slide is Luma, I believe, is our second most common seen in Infostealer last year, and it's rampant. It honestly has been fighting Chrome Loader back and forth for being the most common ones that we see. User downloaded target services by Google Ads. Yes. If I had to give one service that I really wish would shape up, it is Google Ads. You got to train your users. If I told you one thing to do right now in all your environments is train your users, do not trust Google Ads. That would be it, because Google Ads is the number one way we keep seeing these being hijacked, make a domain that looks like what you're downloading. And the user is so trained to be like, oh, first response, click, there you go. Yeah, ad blockers everywhere is a good one too. But honestly, it's this search engine hijacking. And it's crazy to me that people like the bad guys are paying for their ads to get on there, and they're making money off of it. Also they're getting money off the ad revenue that they have for the search engine that they people are mistyping and getting the ad revenue off of it, which is crazy to me on top of that. So yeah, that is the one thing I had to tell everyone to take away today. Train your users that top responses on Google is not always the best one. Yeah.
Yeah, that actually relates. So I'll skip ahead here, but we were going to talk about kind of tips for prevention as well. So,
Hmm.
and someone had asked what are common InfoStealer IOCs that we can look out for in our environments, and I think that kind of relates to this area here as well. Greg, not sure if you wanted to take a crack at that one.
Yeah, so that's that there's so many of them, unfortunately. Like with these, there's a lot of them create run keys. You're going to see run keys creation. And if you have the ability to identify um, file activity post that they're going to be a lot of them are very noisy with file activity. A lot of them will start grabbing files randomly when the user's not logged in. They will start grabbing, they'll start searching disk. A lot of disk IO activity is a key one for that if it's higher. I remember when I was doing development at one point is identifying when disk IO was larger than normal. That was usually a big indicator. So if you have that ability, that is a good one to do. And that's kind of universal across, even if you don't use our product, that's a good one to go with. Disk IO activity is always an interesting one to go after because they do hit disk quite a bit. And they're very good, unfortunately, at finding, at making themselves look like what they are. A lot of them will start downloading components into non-standard folders and non-standard areas. That's another one. If you start seeing uh, files and activity and not like the user's temp folders and temp areas instead of the actual program files and the actual real installer directory locations, that's another one.
Absolutely. All right. Well, just to recap real quick, kind of looking at, when we look at prevention, like, first of all, the business risk. Of course, like the blend of personal and business devices is always an issue. I mean, you'll see a lot of these threat actors targeting personal devices that also have corporate credentials on them, unfortunately. And then also, the kind of remote workforce proliferation over the past few years hasn't helped. The business risk, of course, is credential theft, identity attacks, and setting the stage for future attacks. And yeah, just in terms of what to do here, things like MFA, password managers, and kind of taking an approach of proactive credential monitoring can help with these password best practices. But then you can also set up an environment that like prevents attackers from moving forward once they've actually captured those credentials.
Yeah, I say credential canaries are a good one to do. I've seen that used very successful in the past where they implement credential canaries on end users. One thing to note here is password managers, the standalone ones are actually a little bit harder and not as targeted as well as password managers that are embedded into browsers. So that's if you had to choose one or the other, the standalone applications are a little bit harder, more harder than the ones that are embedded into the browsers. But then again, we all know that users don't get the same functionality and ease of use. So you get the more complaints in IT with that.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
battle, that battle. That's truly where they're winning is the ease of use is where the users decide to not do something, and that's where they get sloppy and the leaks occur.
Absolutely. Yeah. Speaking of password managers, someone had asked how safe are password manager add-ins, if they're in the browser or whatnot.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. The browser add-ins is a haven for not only stealing information but loading malicious content there too. That's a lot of these have browser plugin components themselves.
Absolutely. All right. Um,
Yeah,
Great.
we're at time, but if anyone has some quick questions, I'd love to hear from anyone. Let's see, about this now or forever hold your peace kind of thing. You want to quickly go over stuff for Huntress if no one's got any questions then?
Yes, we've got some upcoming events here. Hunters After Hours and Hunters Roadshow. Um, and we also have an upcoming Tradecraft Tuesday episode for next month, AI friend or foe. So hope everyone can make that one as well. It's going to be an exciting one. Chris Henderson and Truman Kane will be talking for that.
All right.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.